Our first author tonight is Skip Kotkins. Skip, thanks for joining us all the way from the East Coast. Hope we're not keeping you up too late.
Nope, still on West Coast time.
Okay. No jet lag. Good.
Skip, tell us about Perkins Lane. You grew up there, and tell us what your inspiration was for deciding to write about Perkins Lane, a world apart from the rest of Magnolia.
Well, there were two inspirations. The first one is when Monica asks, you can't say no. So that was, I expect that the other authors were probably in the same boat with me on that. But, I like to think that if I knew then what I know now, I would have realized what a really special place it was to grow up on Perkins Lane. And the process of writing the chapter really helped me reflect back on how unique it was. And the kids that lived down there, the families that lived down there. I don't know if we've got a picture or not, but everybody knew about the slides. In fact, the slides were probably the thing that most people knew about Perkins Lane, because periodically a house would go down into the bay, and then in about the mid-1990s, the whole south end of the lane ended up down in Puget Sound. But despite the fact that the slides were probably the headline, it really wasn't what living on Perkins Lane was about. There was so much more to it, and it was really fun to think back, and I know some other members of the kids on the lane, Diane Spalding, some others contributed to the chapter as well.
Skip, can you tell us, for those who are not familiar, why Perkins Lane is so separate from the rest of the Magnolia Peninsula? And did the twain ever meet?
Well, the twain meet by two streets, West Ray Street and then Ruffner up at the north end. But other than that, unlike most city streets that have multiple intersections, there's two ways in and two ways out, and that's it. And so nobody drives through Perkins Lane on the way to anywhere. It is a destination. And for that reason, I think an awful lot of people may not have had any reason to go there. And certainly when you're driving down Magnolia Boulevard and you're looking at that magnificent vista of the Sound to the west, you have no idea that there's something down below.
So what made it different besides the slides? What really brought you all together when you grew up there?
Well, I think early in the chapter, I think I used the phrase, I grew up in the country. And compared to my friends from Briarcliff Grade School and up the hill, we had a very different existence. No sidewalks, it was very different. And we lived on the beach, we lived in the hillside, we went barefoot all summer. It was a very different kind of existence from the rest of the city. And yet there we were 10, 12 minutes from downtown.
And you also were just a stone's throw away from the water. Tell about this unique rock that is a part of your story.
Well, 4 Mile Rock, which is in the picture, was so named because it's 4 miles from Yesler's Wharf at the foot of Henry Yesler's sawmill. And it marked the official entrance to Elliott Bay. And what you see on the picture on top of this giant boulder was a steel aid to navigation, according to the Coast Guard, and on top of it was a light, and that light flashed, and ships coming in and out of the bay would recognize and actually change course to head into Elliott Bay when they came abeam of 4 Mile Rock, if they could see it. If they couldn't see it, there was a foghorn. And the foghorn was something that any of us who lived on Perkins Lane never heard, because it was so much part of the background that we didn't think about it. But if we ever had house guests, they would come down bleary-eyed in the morning and say, what was that noise that kept going? So and there's Indian lore that says that this boulder had some, I think, special powers, or a special meaning to the Native Americans. Of course, it was a remnant of the receding glaciers that formed Puget Sound.
So when you wrote this chapter, what made it fun for you? What made it sing? What made it the kind of thing that you wanted to carry through to completion?
Well, look at that picture. You know, does that look like what most people had in their front yard growing up in Magnolia? You know, and the fun part was recognizing how really different it was. And thinking about my kids and my grandchildren, and what a very, very special opportunity it was for this pack of kids whose parents had chosen to live there, to live in the water, to live on the hillside. And it was really fun to go back and just think about that, Clay, and appreciate once again how unique it was.
Well, when you say you felt like you were in the country, you feel that way, but you're just minutes away from downtown.
In fact, it's a little known piece of information, but when they platted Seattle, there are actually 2 city streets platted on the tidelands, because at one point they thought, well, maybe they're going to build streets out there. So not only were we minutes from the city, if you looked at a map, we were actually on the grid. The only problem is the grid was wet, certainly the better part of most days.
So you could literally be underwater on your mortgage.
Yeah. Thanks, Tab.
It's a great story. You just have to read it to get so much more out of it.
Absolutely.
And Diane Spalding's chapter in the same section was really excellent too.
Yeah, I certainly want to encourage people not just to read it because I wrote it, but because I think all of the authors had the experience of reliving their youth and growing up, and having a chance to tell today's readers about it. I encourage everybody, get the book and read it.
Well, you know, it's also an example of a neighborhood within a neighborhood. And I think anybody can identify with that. You know, when people ask you, where do you live? You know, you have a choice. You can say, well, I live in Seattle, or I live in Magnolia, or I live in Perkins Lane. You know, and they all have different shades of meanings to different people. And you've obviously got a pride of having lived through that very formative time for yourself in a unique part of Seattle. So thanks for doing the chapter.
Sure, it was my pleasure.